He's a busy man. He's Ross Tucker, Westwood One, CBS Sports NFL college football analyst and host of the Ross Tucker Football Podcast. Doubleheader this weekend, Wake Forest, UConn for CBS Sports, and then Jets Steelers, Westwood One Sunday night. Check him out on social media at Ross Tucker NFL. What do you do if you're the Lions this morning, Ross?
Oh, Dan, that hurt my heart, man. That really, really did. I mean, he's probably their best player, to watch that. And I felt bad, Dan. All I had this past weekend was a college game. So while I'm watching the Lions blow out the Cowboys, I posted on social media, I'm ready to watch the Lions win the Super Bowl. I'm not kidding, Dan. Within 2 minutes, that injury happened. So Lions fans think I jinxed them. I think they do need to at least explore who else they could get. Heck, maybe they should call the Jets and try to get Hassan Reddick. Doesn't seem like he really wants to be. If Drew Rosenhaus is meeting with the Jets today about Reddick's contract, why don't they just, he probably doesn't really want to be there, figure it out, send him to Detroit somehow, because you don't say this with that many injuries. It's hard to picture them winning the Super Bowl without him. He's their best player. He was one of the front runners for Defensive Player of the Year. Yes, teams overcome injuries, but rarely to guys like that. You're going to play 3 or 4 playoff games. You need to close those games out. You need to have a dominant player that offenses need to worry about, and that offensive linemen like me, we're doubling up. We're talking about all week. That feels like one of the injuries you can't overcome unless you get somebody else in there.
Okay. Do you call the Browns about Myles Garrett?
Yeah, but they're not going to do that. I mean, that would really surprise me. Although, in fairness, I say that about the Jets. They just fired their head coach, and this is the last year of the contract for the GM, Joe Douglas. So if you're Joe Douglas, why would you trade Hassan Reddick? And in fact, why wouldn't you just give Hassan Reddick whatever contract he wants so he plays for you as soon as possible so you can win 10 games and make the playoffs and maybe get a new contract from your owner, Woody Johnson? I mean, it's not your money. At this point, you might as well do whatever you can, throw out all the stops to try to get Reddick to play for the Jets if you're there this year. I mean, yeah, you can call the Browns, but that would really surprise me.
The Cowboys situation, it's not going to get better. It's probably going to get worse. But can you do anything to placate your fan base here? At least the Jets fired their head coach. What is Jerry Jones? What did the Cowboys do to rectify this if they can?
Well, so that's interesting because it feels like Jerry Jones used to be very sort of a impulsive, impetuous owner. He's changed, Dan, almost in every way, right? To go into this season being clearly worse at a number of positions, and to know probably ahead of time you weren't really a contender going into this year, and he seems okay with that for whatever reason. My guess is they will convince themselves that, that only happened because Micah Parsons didn't play and DeMarcus Lawrence, and when they get those guys back. But it does feel like there's a number of situations around the league right now where it feels like the head coach is kind of hanging on by threads.
Okay, would you say Doug Peterson's situation is worse in trying to keep his job, or Mike McCarthy?
I would say Peterson's is worse just because they've been that bad. The Cowboys, last week they beat the Steelers in Pittsburgh without some of their best players. So at least I think for the Cowboys, you could stay, we're still right in the mix in the NFC East. For the Jags, it feels like an ugly situation. I mean, almost all those guys, if you look at that team, Dan, almost all those guys have gotten big contracts from the Jags. Like, these are the guys the Jags want to have playing. It's not some big injury issue. They paid the whole O-line. All their receivers are like Gabe Davis, Christian Kirk. I mean, their whole defense. These are the guys that the Jags want to have on their team and they've invested in, and they're still terrible. That's a really tough thing for a coach and GM to come back from.
I know you're close to the Eagles situation. Nick Sirianni doesn't comport himself as a head coach. Like, you're engaging with the crowd. And look, I know that Philadelphia crowd can be rough. Even after a win, it just feels like this doesn't end well. Your thoughts about this team?
Well, so what's so interesting about it is that he did stuff like this in 22 when they went to the Super Bowl and were probably the best team in the league. And because they were so good and because they were winning and because he was primarily doing it like to the camera or to the opposing team's fans, a lot of people kind of liked it, right? Well, they have the collapse last year. They're not playing well this year. They certainly did not play well yesterday, even though they won the game. And now he's doing it to Eagles fans. That does not go over very well. Now, the funny thing is, as you know, I'm from there, right? And so I see the text messages from my buddies. I know that if a bunch of my buddies were ever the head coach of the Eagles and they were getting booed, that they would probably do the same stuff. Yeah. We won. What do you think now? Like, what are you going to say now? Because that's how a lot of people from where we're from are like. But it's not a good look. I'm surprised he did it. What's interesting to me about it, Dan, is Brandon Graham was laughing about it. And then Jalen Hurts said after the game that I guess a bunch of the leaders on the team, like Hurts and Brandon Graham, have encouraged Sirianni to be more like he was in 2022.
Oh, okay.
To show more emotion, to be more like that. Maybe he was trying to do what the players told him they wanted during the bye week. I'm not sure, but man, you barely beat the Browns. You win a game like that. It's not a good look. You're never going to win, and you know this, Dan, but especially in Philadelphia, you're never going to win saying anything to your own fans, anything other than they were right to boo. We weren't playing well. We were in a close game against the Browns. We had just gotten a field goal blocked and returned for a touchdown to tie the game. I understand why they were booing. I would have been booing as well.
We're talking Ross Tucker, Westwood One, CBS Sports NFL and college football analyst, host of the Ross Tucker Football Podcast. Yeah, and then he brings his son to the press conference. Like, if you want to deflect getting in front of the media, bring one of your kids and sit them on your lap, as Nick Sirianni did yesterday. Well done.
Well, he's done that a bunch. In fairness, he does bring his kids to the post-game press conference a decent amount of the time. That's another one that it's so funny. Like, when they were winning and really rolling people, Dan, people thought it was cute and awesome, right? But now that he had that incident at the end of the game and they barely won, now everybody's saying he's deflecting. And in fairness, or using them as a shield. In fairness, the Philadelphia media does not care. They ask them all the questions anyway, right? They don't care who you have there. They're going to ask the questions anyway. So, if the goal was
you have to
have
say
them there,
earmuffs, you say to your kid earmuffs.
Yeah, like if that was the goal to protect him, I don't think it really worked because they still asked him those same questions.
Okay, what do you expect to happen tonight with the Jets offense against Buffalo now that you've demoted Nathaniel Hackett and you've fired Robert Saleh?
Man, I am so curious. Let's be honest. At this point, they might as well just made Aaron Rodgers the player coach, right? They might as well just go no huddle and let Rodgers call the plays. That's what he wants to do anyway. That would be his preference. I got to tell you, that game last week, Dan, when they were playing the Vikings, that's about as miserable of a facial expression, body language as I think I've seen a guy play football in a long time. I posted during the game, I'd be really surprised if he plays next year. Maybe they turn it around and they have a great year and they go on a run. But he's getting the crap beat out of him. He looks like, even when Brady was playing for the Bucks, he didn't look old. You know what I mean? And maybe that's because of whatever Brady does with his body and whatever. But like Rodgers looked sad, old, miserable. He did not look like he looked like he was having zero fun, Dan. Zero fun.
The Ravens with Derrick Henry and without Derrick Henry, how does that? I mean, what they're doing running is historical. I mean, we have not seen this differential between what the Ravens do running and what the opposition does. So you're keeping your defense off the field. You're running the football. Now play action really means something. So when Lamar does play action, I mean, this is old school football in a lot of ways. But Derrick Henry does he make them the best team in the AFC?
I think he does. That's you just took the words right out of my mouth, Dan. I think he does. I mean,
Okay.
what you have is a quarterback that's still playing at an MVP level like he did last year, and you've added a Hall of Fame running back. And by the way, I don't know how many more Hall of Fame running backs there are going to be, or how many more guys we can say while they're playing are a Hall of Fame running back. But that's Henry, and he has added an element to them. The concerning thing there is they're not as good on defense as they've been the last couple of years.
Yeah.
They're not as good in particular in the secondary, which is why I think it behooves them to run the ball more like they have been with Derrick Henry to try to keep that secondary on the sideline. I mean, I thought they were the best team last year, and they blew it against the Chiefs in the AFC Championship. Right now, I think they're the best team again. Whether or not they'll be able to get it done in a playoff game against Mahomes and Kelsey and the Chiefs, we'll see. But they certainly have a lot of the pieces that you'd like to be able to knock off the Chiefs.
I think that's the first behoove that we've had on the show, at least in a while. I mean, very impressive there.
I don't break it out often, and I don't really know where I got it. Do you feel like that's the word, a type of word that someone says when they're trying to act smarter than they really are? Or was that did that flow naturally?
Well, it's I went to Princeton and you didn't kind of feel to it. I mean, that's what I'm getting from you.
Well, what's the other word I would use there? Like, what's the other word? And what's the alternative? It helps their defense out.
That'd
It
been
behooves
nice.
it. It behooves their defense.
It would be good for them, you could have said. But you dropped a behoover. Okay.
I got a question. Do we think that Fritzy knows the word behooves, what it means, and or has ever used it in a sentence in his life?
Todd?
I'm familiar with the definition. I don't know if I've ever used it.
What is the definition?
I don't know how to define it in words, but I know how to use it in a sentence. It's that kind of word that you can't really.
No. We're asking for the definition.
Like, it would behoove me to not eat like 9 slices of pizza when I get home for lunch. Okay. It would be a good idea to not do that. It would behoove me to go for a walk instead of eating like a Jersey Mike Giant sub. Okay. That's how I would use behoove.
Okay. All right. Well, it behooves me to say goodbye to you, Ross, because it's time to move on. We have to give our best and worst of the weekend. Thanks for joining us as always, bud.
All right, take care, Dan.
That's Ross Tucker, Westwood One, CBS Sports NFL college football analyst. He's a busy man. Busy man.